bottom line is that no matter what kind of cycles you have, regular or irregular, you can chart your cycles and you can use natural family planning to avoid pregnancy if you need to.
Hey there, welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, where we're expanding the natural family planning conversation. I'm your host, Ellen Holloway. Welcome back to another episode. We are right in the middle of our huge series on NFP use through different seasons of life. And this episode is using NFP, trying to avoid when you have irregular cycles. So we're covering both irregular cycles that should be addressed medically, things like, hormone imbalances or PCOS or endometriosis. But we're also covering trying to avoid when you have kind of normal cycle irregularities. So things like postpartum, perimenopause, things like that. All right, everyone, we are here with Lisa Kimball, who is, today we're going to be talking about trying to avoid when you have irregular cycles. So this is part of that larger series that we have going on right now with using NFP in different seasons of your life or seasons of NFP use. So before we, dive into the topic, welcome. And could you just introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Lisa Kimball. I'm a medical doctor and I did my residency training in obstetrics and gynecology. I chose this specialty so that I could practice what's called restorative reproductive medicine.
Woo!
And, really, I wanted to be able to offer women healthcare that truly my passion was, so that it was completely in line with Catholic Church teaching. So of course, a big part of practicing that is learning fertility awareness methods or natural family planning and, being able to use that data to chart, to monitor a woman's health. So in residency, I did get to train with a necrotechnology physician. So I'm very familiar with their protocols. And then I'm also certified as a FEM provider. And so both of these, your listeners are probably familiar with this, but both of these fall under restorative reproductive medicine.
Right.
So that's a little bit about me.
That is fabulous. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, especially talking about this topic. Because I think, one of the things that I hear quite a bit, and you probably do too, and I think a lot of people who kind of work in an NFP space hear this a lot is, well, I have irregular cycles, so I can't use NFP. And we're here today to tell you that's not true.
That's right.
Also some caveats to that of, don't just sit in the irregularities of your cycle. Okay. So the season that we're talking about is the season of trying to avoid, or sometimes people just call this using NFP, like there's sort of this, I don't know, it comes up a lot where it's like, oh, I'm using NFP. And so you just kind of assume that that's trying to avoid. So, but when you are using NFP with the intention of trying to avoid, and in particular, you have some sort of irregularity with your cycle, maybe that's super long cycles, super painful cycles, anovulatory cycles, whatever, some sort of irregularity. We're going to touch on a couple of things in the podcast, but that's the season that we're talking about. So what would you say are some of the most difficult aspects to charting and using NFP when you're sitting in this season?
Yeah. So first of all, I'd like to just talk a little bit about irregular cycles and, what do we do about them? You can have irregular cycles for a reason that is normal or physiologic. For example, if you're in adolescence and you just started your period, you're within the first year or two of having periods, that would be a normal time to have irregular cycles. Also, if you're postpartum or breastfeeding, that would also be another time that it's normal to have irregular cycles.
That's right where I'm sitting right now.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. It's just harder in those times.
It's a tough season to be in.
Yeah. And then the third one is in perimenopause, or as we're approaching menopause, we kind of fall back, towards that cycle of, it's similar to being back in adolescence. You go back to having irregular cycles. So it's important to recognize that there are times when irregular cycles are normal. But then if your irregular cycles are happening for reasons other than those just listed, then, you need to figure out why are you having those irregular cycles? And so, with that, I think you need to work closely, first of all, with any irregular cycles, work closely with a qualified fertility charting instructor.
Yes.
That would
Say
be
it again. Work closely with your instructor. Don't DIY it.
Right. Yes, definitely work closely with the instructor. And with the irregular cycles, ideally using a method that has more than one biomarker.
That is a really good point that I hadn't thought about. But yeah, having that cross check of additional biomarkers can be really convenient, or not convenient, just really helpful when you are dealing with irregularities.
Right. Yeah. So, and just to go over what that means, we want to, when we're talking about the biomarkers, we're talking about the most common one is cervical mucus. And in my opinion, that is the best one. But, with irregular cycles, that biomarker can be really hard to distinguish, what's my peak mucus, or, for example, with PCOS, you have a lot of fluctuating estrogen. And so with that, you get patches of mucus here and there. And so with that becomes difficult to chart, especially if you're trying to avoid when is it safe to have intercourse.
Yeah.
And so that's where having more than one biomarker will come in, and help with that. And so some of these other biomarkers would be something like the LH test strips, or sometimes called ovulation predictor kits. Although with PCOS, a lot of times you'll get positive LH, throughout your cycle. So that may not be the best one if PCOS is the problem. Other things, you can use your basal body temperature. And those are the main biomarkers that I like to use. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that basal body temperature, I think it's important to note that that's really only going to help you confirm ovulation. It's not going to tell you anything prior to ovulation.
Right.
Basal body temperature doesn't help you predict ovulation. It helps you confirm that it happened.
Exactly.
I think that's a common misunderstanding of basal body temperature.
Yeah. And the other newer one, I personally haven't used it, but using like the Prove test strips.
Oh, right. Yeah. I've heard so many things about them. I haven't done anything with them, but it
would be the same thing, after ovulation occurs, your body produces progesterone. And so it's picking up, it's detecting whether or not you have high progesterone at that time. And so again, that would be another biomarker that would confirm that ovulation has occurred.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that was a great, kind of intro into that. So what else is really like difficult about charting during this season?
I think, the other important thing to bring up is, with irregular cycles, and especially if you're trying to avoid, this can cause some tension in your relationship.
Yeah.
So an important thing would, be to communicate with your partner, with your spouse, just making sure you nourish that component. I think that would be an important thing.
Absolutely. The communication piece is so important in, using the tool that is NFP at any point in your marriage, regardless of the season. But particularly when you have irregular cycles and and either if you have irregular cycles and you need to seek medical help for those, or if you're in one of those seasons that has typically irregular cycles like postpartum, that communication becomes just like 100 times more important. And just understand that you're on the same page. And because I think what can happen a lot of times for the woman who is charting is it feels like it's your fault. And it's not, this is not something you can control. This is your body either, trying to regulate itself or fighting a disease or, whatever it is that's going on. It has nothing to do with, you can't control it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. Exactly.
So yeah. So having that communication, that's such a good point. So what kind of suggestions do you have for women or couples who are navigating the season of NFP? Maybe we'll start with couples who are navigating this season because they have something they need to get medically looked at for their cycle irregularities.
Yeah. So if you're having irregular cycles for a medical reason, basically for a reason other than adolescence, postpartum breastfeeding, or perimenopause, I think it's really important to find a doctor who practices restorative reproductive medicine. In the US, a lot of those doctors are either going to be naprotechnology doctors, or FEM is another one. There's also some people, you might see them here. I know one personally. You might see neofertility is another one.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But any of those doctors are going to be well educated on how to find the root cause of, what's causing your irregular cycles. And they're going to offer you treatments other than the birth control pill. They'll do a deep dive into testing, and then their treatments that they offer will be treatments that will work to restore your reproductive function, to try to bring you back into having normal cycles. So I think that, to me, that would be the most important thing. If you're having irregular cycles, to find the doctor that's right for you and work with them to try to, fix your irregular cycles.
Definitely. And something else that I thought of as you were saying that, that we already we sort of touched on before when you were talking about the different biomarkers, is that if you're facing a season of irregular cycles, take a look at the method that you're using and kind of take an inventory and find out, is this method serving me correctly in this season? Or do I need to go look into a different method? I think I hear it so often that women postpartum switch to a symptohormonal method because they want to have that additional cross check. And, that's neither here nor there for me. You can do whatever you want. For some women, just tracking mucus postpartum works fine. But it's important to take an inventory of that, because if you are using a method that's not suited properly for you, especially if you're trying to avoid and you have these cycle irregularities, it can just cause even more stress and harm on the relationship and on your mental health.
Yes. I hear that a lot. Especially, I know we're not really talking about infertility, but it all ties together. You have to find the method that works for you. Because and the more biomarkers you add, it definitely it can add stress, and along with that, stress on the relationship, things like that. So yeah, I agree. That's a really good point.
So important. Do you have any other kind of tips or suggestions for women who are navigating a season of irregular cycles?
I guess bottom line is, even with the irregular cycles, you can still use natural family planning. I did have a patient in residency who she has and she didn't have irregular cycles, but it always just really impressed me because she was Catholic, but she had a heart condition that if she gets pregnant, she would likely die. And she had all these doctors urging her, you need to be on birth control, you need to be sterilized. And, she stood her ground and didn't want that because of her faith. And, she was determined to use natural family planning to avoid pregnancy. So
that's an amazing story. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just knowing there are women out there who are that convicted, I mean, bottom line is that no matter what kind of cycles you have, regular or irregular, you can chart your cycles and you can use natural family planning to avoid pregnancy if you need to.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think I agree that is just such an important point, such an important kind of bottom line is, look, this is something that you can use if you have irregular cycles. And in many cases, actually charting your cycle with a fertility awareness-based method will help you to determine what that irregularity is. And a doctor can help you, a specifically trained doctor, not just any doctor.
Right. Yes.
Can help you to, take care of whatever that is or mitigate it or, whatever it is. Cause there are many, many different ways, or reasons for having irregular cycles.
Right.
But yeah. And then just on kind of the other side of that, the seasons, when you have, naturally irregular cycles, it's just important to note that you can still use natural family planning to avoid a pregnancy during those times. It is going to be harder. And so, just kind of repeating what we were talking about earlier, you need to communicate during those seasons. It's so important. Because it's so much harder because it's going to be more strain on the woman who's charting. It's going to be strain on the relationship because there's probably going to be more abstinence than typical. And that communication can really bolster your intimacy outside of the bedroom with your spouse.
Right. Yes. That both of those are great points. And I just wanted to add in there, as far as working with a doctor, we can find the cause for the irregular cycles. You have to find the right doctor though.
Yes.
But, even between FEM and naprotechnology, they both are wonderful, but even between the two, there's differences. And for example, FEM uses very, very strict reference ranges when it comes to looking at the different hormones. They do a very in-depth hormone profile. And so with that, they have a lot of tools in the bucket that they can use to try to balance all of those hormones. So definitely work with a doctor who's willing to dive deep into looking for the cause.
Yes, definitely. And I'm going to link in the show notes, just, the main NAPRA website, the main Fem Health website, and then also the Neo Fertility website if you're interested in kind of learning more or finding a doctor.
Yeah.
Well,
yep.
Dr. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was fantastic, a great conversation. I appreciated everything that you had to share with us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I would just say one more thing to your listeners, to spread the word about restorative reproductive medicine. A lot of people don't know about it. Even among Catholic circles, a lot of Catholic women and a lot of Catholic couples don't know about it. And so I think we need to do our part to tell more people that this is available. Especially for those who have irregular cycles and need a little extra help. So.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you for adding that in. That was great. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is one episode in a multi-part series, charting through the seasons using NFP through different seasons of life. So be sure to check out the episodes before this episode, and then also stick around for the rest of this series. We still have 4 more episodes to go. And I think we start getting into the really juicy episodes next that people are excited about. Until next time.